I think it's less than happens in a barn because they're spaced out.
Right, right.
They evolved to do those things, and we put them into a system that they didn't evolve in.
And they've got pasture and can get away from one.
Yeah, that's what they do. I mean, I didn't grow up on a sheep farm. I think it would probably advantageous, but I kind of question some of these things that we do.
Right.
But if you go out there and watch them, I mean, don't tell my supervisor this, but there's times I go out there and I just sit out in a pasture and watch and see what the heck's going on. And those ewes, you know, oftentimes those ewes prior to lambing, they'll just get off by themselves away from the main flock. And they'll give birth and they take care of business. And when they're ready, her and the lambs come back into it. And they do it on their own schedule, you know.
When I've been up there, get out of the unit and be talking to the shepherds, and they'll just flat tell you if you got that grandma ewe, she either has accident or gets sold off because she's not fitting the mold, and she may not even be close to lambing. She goes and tries to carry those lambs off. That ewe needs to be gotten out of the system. And they'll flat tell you that those ewes need to go. They want to carry those lambs off.
The purpose of this slide, just to show you some idea how large this experiment was, we had about 400 ewes in the high input system and another 400 in the low input system, and produced a little over 4,000 lambs in it. Okay, so here's one slide to summarize the output of this. In the high input system, well what's obvious out? The high input system, if we look at litter weight at 24 weeks of age, the ewes in the high input system were more productive than the ewes in the low input system for two reasons. Ewes that are bred in October will give birth to more lambs than ewes that are bred in December because there's a big seasonal effect on ovulation rate. So that's about 2/10 of a lamb right there. Okay, so that's a kind of a necessary bias in there that I don't like, but it had to work that way. The other thing that happens is that the lambs that were born in the high input system have access to creep feed from the get-go. So they are heavier. At 24 weeks of age, the individual weights are heavier. So that's why these ewes are more productive than these ewes.
What are the initials? I can't get them.
Oh, super. Thank you. These are the white Dorper Romanoff crosses, the Dorper Romanoff crosses, Katahdin, Romanoff, Dorset, and Rambouillet. Okay,
So there was quite a difference between the white Dorper and the...
yeah, that had never been done before. That was something unexpected. And the only reason I did this, I knew when I wrote a manuscript up on this, they're going to ask me the differences, so I analyzed the data to evaluate it. I thought, well, now I can tell them there aren't any differences. And when I analyzed it, yes, there were. There were big differences there. Okay, so these ewes are more productive than these ewes, but the concept across there was that the white Dorper Romanoff crosses were more productive in each system. See? Let's skip that one for the sake of time. Let's look at the low input system because I think this is interesting. Okay, the white Dorper Romanoff ewes are more productive than the four other types of crossbred ewes out there. If you look at fertility rates, this is the average productivity of ewes at 1, 2, and 3 years of age. Okay. So there are very small differences in fertility rate. The white Dorper Romanoff ewes have one of the lower drop rates. That's lambs born for ewe lambing. But their losses were low. They lost fewer lambs than the other four types. Obviously then lamb survival is higher. And they have more lambs alive at 24 weeks of age than the other four types. But the other key thing here is that the average lamb weight is also higher. I think what's going on there is milk production. I think the white Dorper breed is bringing in better milk production that affects both lamb survival and lamb growth. That's what I think is going on. We obviously didn't measure milk production, so we don't have any data to support that. But the bottom line is if you look at a litter weight at 24 weeks of age per ewe exposed in the system, they are more productive than the other four types that we evaluated in this system. How many of you have Romanoff white Dorper crosses here? Okay, that's okay. Don't be proud of these ewes. Okay, for those of you that haven't seen them, I mean, the Romanoff has a combination of both hair and wool, and they shed quite a bit of that off naturally. The White Dorper has actually got a fair bit of hair and wool in it also. But you can see here, this picture was probably taken in the middle of June or something, towards the end of June. But there's ewes here that have shed, pretty well shed out on their own. That's part of this low input stuff. We don't have to shear anymore. They shed that out. So there's ewes that have shed out pretty completely. There's others like this one here that you just catch them in various degrees. This is an unselected sample. This is just a random sample of ewes out there. And we get a lot of variability in shedding, which is something that ultimately.
But all of them have clean bellies up around the edge.
Yeah, they all do. They're all clean. They're all clean underneath, and it's not an issue, I don't think at all.
That's the main thing.
Yeah. I mean, it can look ugly at times of the year if you don't shear.
I
Because
have a girlfriend like that.
yeah, I don't worry about it. I mean, yeah. Okay. Here's something else we learned that I think was really interesting. We looked at the survival rate of those lambs, whether they were born as singles and twins, and whether they were born to a ewe that was 1, 2, and 3 years old. Now, this slide shows that a single-born lamb born to a 1-year-old ewe had a higher survival rate than a twin-born lamb born to a 1-year-old ewe. Does that make sense? Okay? So a young ewe that's immature can handle a single better than she can twins. Okay, that's not surprising. I think most data would say that. But what we learned in both the 2- and the 3-year-old ewes was that a ewe that gave birth, lambs that were born as twins had just as high a survival rate as lambs that were born as singles to a 2- and 3-year-old ewe. Just as good, if not better. That's really important. Now, this is in a pasture lambing system with no labor, no supplemental feed or anything. So a ewe that gave birth to twins, my take on this is she's not being challenged at all. With this type of breeding that we're talking about here, asking a 2- and 3-year-old ewe to rear twins isn't asking much of her. She can do that just as well as if she only has a single out there. That's pretty important. But you got to realize, the key to this, the constant in this thing is half Romanoff. Okay, this is average over the other 5 breeds that we had in there. If it wasn't half Romanoff, if it was something else, this may not have held up. But I think this is an important fact that came out of here that hadn't ever been tested before. So, if raising twins isn't a challenge, what do we want to do? We want to find ewes that can raise triplets. Okay? That's what I want to do.
This was all the crosses.
All 5 crosses. And there were pretty big differences between those.
Yeah.
The White Dorper Romanoff. So, let me get to this one. We had over 200 sets of triplets that were born to 2- and 3-year-old ewes on pasture. Okay, and this is what happened to them. Probably 6 ewes lost all of their lambs. 10% of the ewes raised a single. 40% raised twins, but 47% of the ewes raised all 3 triplets with no input, unselected. That was as high as White Dorper Romanoff crosses. 62% of the White Dorper Romanoff ewes that gave birth to triplets raised all 3 lambs.
Which breed was the worst about the lowest number of triplets?
What one do you think?
Dorset Romanoff girls.
The Rambouillet Romanoff had lower survival. We're not as good at rearing triplets. I think the difference is milk production, but it's also maternal behavior. This is why we wanted to stay out of the pastures, but we go out there with that 4-wheeler and we pick up those lambs, and some of those ewes will take off a quarter mile away. You know what? Okay, that's a problem. We don't run around with a 4-wheeler and try to catch the ewe and bring her back or anything, so that's a problem. We're going to get around this in another experiment we'll do. But the maternal behavior is really important. And to me, again, this is just my observation, the Dorper seems to be a little easier going that way than some of the other breeds, perhaps. Dorper and the White Dorper.
The inverse of that is when